Good afternoon everyone. Welcome to my series of videos where I'm going to be looking at the Mask Trilogy of board games. Now these board games are quite old, they've been around for some time, they've been reprinted, and I feel that there's not really a lot of buzz about them, and they're good solid games, so I thought it would be nice to do a wee video just highlighting the games, talking about, the differences, the similarities, and just really give you an idea of what to expect. The Mask Trilogy is a series of games co-designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kesling. Now, all the games in the group have some similarities and some crossover in terms of mechanics, but they're also quite different games in their own right. There are 3 official games in the series: Tikal, which was released in 1999, Java, which was released in 2000, and Mexica, which was released in 2002. There's also a 4th unofficial game that's sometimes considered part of the trilogy called Torres, but I will not be covering this in this series of videos. Whilst the games are quite different in terms of gameplay, they all share 2 traits. First of all, on the box they all depict a mask that links to that particular culture. And the second thing is they use something called an action point allowance system, which is where the player will have so many action points allocated to them on their turn, and there will be a series of actions that they can choose to do in order to best accomplish their goals. I'm going to be covering the games in chronological order of release, so given that this is the first video, we're going to be starting with none other than Tikal. As you can see here, we've got the lovely green box and the nice prominent mask here, and this game is based on Mayan culture. And in it you are going to be controlling a group of archaeologists who are trying to excavate Mayan ruins and dig up ancient artifacts. Without further ado, let's get started. So to help explain the objective and the mechanics of the game, I thought it'd be worthwhile just setting up a board here just so I can talk you through it. So in Tikal, you are basically taking the role of archaeologists exploring Mayan ruins. So you can see here on the board we've got some temples, we've got a base camp here which is where everybody starts, we've got a few artifact sites here as well, and these are the main tiles of the board that you're going to be placing over the course of the game. Now, the main mechanic in Tikal is the idea of this action system. So what you're going to do is on your turn you're going to draw a new tile from the supply, and they'll come out in a certain order, and you're going to place it somewhere on the board, and then you're going to have 10 action points to do various different actions. Okay, so just to demonstrate how a new tile is placed, say it was the start of my turn and I was the black player, I might draw this tile here, and you can see 2 of the edges have these little stone kind of rectangles, and these are entrances to the site. And how it works is you need to place it so it's touching at least 2 other tiles, and you also need to make sure that you have a way of getting in or out. Now, if there are no stone steps joining at a side, then you cannot cross that way. But if there is at least 1 stone step, then that's a path to that tile that you can take from the adjacent tile. And when moving, you count up the number of steps on both sides, and that is a total action point cost to move. So by careful placement of the tile, you can make it expensive to get to an area from a tile, and maybe cheaper from another tile. So the idea is that you're trying to make it so that it's easier for you to get into the tile and more difficult for your opponents depending on the placement. Now you'll see here this is an artifact tile as well. So when this comes out, we would put some artifacts on it, but I'm going to come to that when we talk about the actions. Now, the overall goal of the game is to try and get the most points. You get points during a scoring round for controlling these temples here, with the numbers on them, and you also get points for picking up artifacts, which can be found in these artifact sites here. And there will be scoring rounds every time a volcano tile comes up, and then there's also a final scoring round at the end of the game as well. Okay, so we're now going to talk about the various actions available in the game. Now, each player actually gets one of these wee boards here, which tells you the available actions that you have at your disposal. So you've always got that for reference. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run through the actions one by one and explain what they do. So at the start of the turn, you'll see here you get your 10 action points, and you can allocate them however you wish. You can do these actions in any order as many times as you want, with a few exceptions. Now the first action here is to bring out a new guy to your starting camp or any other camps that you might have placed later in the game, and that costs 1 action point. So for 1 action point, I could take one guy from a supply and I could place it here. That's simple. If there are other camps out in the game, we can also move between them for 1 action point, but we'll get to that when I explain the camp action. Okay, now the second one is to move an archaeologist. Now, before when I talked about the placing tiles, the movement cost is dependent on the number of steps between hexes. So for example, if this one here wanted to move here, that would cost 1 action point because there's 1 stone step on this tile and 0 on this tile. However, if they wanted to move here, that would cost 2 because there's 2 stone steps between the tiles. This one here would cost them 3 to move in there. So it's pretty straightforward. You just basically count the number of steps, and that's the cost to move that figure, and you deduct it from your total. Now the next one is actually the upgrade action, and how this works is these temples with numbers here will give you a certain number of points for controlling them in a scoring round. You can, if you have an available guy, the spot, spend 2 action points to upgrade it to the next level, which means that it will be worth more points if you control that. Now you can do that up to 2 times per hex, but you must have a separate guy for each of those actions. So you would need to have 2 guys there at least, and you would need to spend 4 action points, and you could upgrade twice and no more than that. But you could upgrade somewhere else. So there is a restriction on that. And that basically allows you to make these starting temples that come out early in the game worth a lot more towards the end of the game. So that's quite a useful action. The next one is the excavate action. On this, you spend 3 action points and you take one of these excavation tokens and then you put that into your supply. Now, these tokens have different symbols on them. You're trying to collect sets of them, so ones that are the same. One by itself is 1 point, but if you collect a double or a triple, they're worth a lot more points during scoring. So you would take this and you put it into your supply. Now again, there is a restriction there. You can only dig at each site twice per hex, and you have to have a separate guy there if you want to dig more than once. The next action that you can do is swapping tokens. So if another player has a token in their supply, I'm just going to reveal a few of these. So for example, if I had these 3 tokens and my opponent had collected one of these tokens, for 3 points they can swap a token. Now in this case they couldn't swap because they only have 1, but say they drew this here. They now have 2 tokens. They want to get a set. So what they could do is they could swap this here with that there, and they now have a set which is worth more points because they've got 2 that are the same. Now when you do this action, you must have a spare to trade, and your opponent cannot refuse, so you can't block someone from doing this action. However, sets cannot be broken, so once you have a set, it's locked in and no one else can break that set, which means collecting them early is really useful because they can't be taken away from you. So I'll just put that back to where it was. Okay, and again, you're trying to collect as many sets as you can because they score you points during the scoring. The next action is the camp action. In your supply, you have 2 camps that you can play over the course of the game. And these camps can either go in an empty area, or they can go in an archaeological site, but only after all the tokens have been taken. So for 5 points, you place a camp down there, and that allows you to bring workers in just like you can at the starting location for a cost of 1. And you can also spend 1 to move workers between camps as well. So this is quite useful later in the game or mid-game when you're pushing out, you want to establish a foothold, you plonk down a camp, and that means that you can get guys out nice and cheap and you can move them around much more easily. So that's a big part of the game, is making sure that you place these in a good location so that you can get to the new tiles as they come out. Finally, we have a guard action. Now, to show you the guard action, I am going to use this hex here as an example. So, when a scoring round comes around, you check all of the temples to see who has control, and the person who has the most number of workers there has control, and they score the points and no one else does. And that's just the way it works. Now, there is a way to lock this in so that you have control of a hex or temple for the rest of the game, and that is using this action here. Now, first of all, it costs 5 points, so it's quite expensive. And the second thing is that you need to have majority to actually do it. So you need to be in control already to do this action. And what you do is, basically, you spend your 5 and you place one of your workers on the temple, and all of the rest of the workers in that area are removed from the game. But you place them on the temple in the middle. And what that means is you now guard that temple and no one else can score it apart from you for the rest of the game. There is a few caveats though. Once you've locked in and you're guarding it, you can no longer upgrade it. So you want to do this after you've maybe upgraded the temple to make it worth your while. The other thing as well is opponents can still move through it, but they can't obviously vie for control and try and get the points. And you can only do this twice in the game. So once you've guarded 2 temples, you're out of luck. The other thing as well is you lose all your guys. So if you've got 5 guys in the area and you've just barely got control, you're going to lose all of those guys, which can mean it's more difficult to take control of other areas in the future if you run out of the supply. Okay, so we're now going to talk about when scoring happens in Tikal. And this is when a player draws a volcano tile from the supply. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to place a volcano tile. And then they're going to have 10 actions. And at the end of their 10 actions, they're going to score. And then the player after them will have 10 actions and then they will score. And so on until everybody's scored. And then play goes back to the first player who's placed the volcano tile, and then they take their normal turn effectively. So, how does scoring work? Well, there are 2 things that you score. First of all, you score your temples, and second of all, you score your artifacts that you've collected. So what we'll do is we'll do a wee rundown of scoring and give you an idea of how this would work. So, say it's the black player, and they draw this, and they place it there. They then have 10 actions in order to try and score as much points as possible. So at the moment they're not in control here, so what they could do is they could spend 2 action points to place a guy there. They could spend another 2 action points to move a guy there. They're already in control here, and they could get in control here, but what they might want to do is they might want to just draw one of these tiles here and hope that they get lucky. So they draw a tile here and they get that there. So that's another 3. So that was 2, 2, 3. So they still have another 3 actions. So what they could do is they could plonk a guy down here and then move him there. So that's 1 action, 2, 3. That's their 10 actions. They would now score. So we go around the board and we just check to see what they would score. So first of all, they're in control of this temple. They would get a point. They would also get a point, 2 points here, so that's 3. They don't get any points here. They get another 2 points, that's 5. Here, they don't break the tie, so they don't get any points there. But they do get a point for that there. So they would get 6 points from that. And then for their artifacts, because they only have a single one of each, they would get 1 point each. So they would get another point for each of these. So in total, they would have 8 points. We would then move to the orange player. So it's now up to them to try and get as many points as possible. So they've got their 10 actions. So the first thing that they're going to do is they really want to make sure they control some areas. So they're going to spend 1 point to move, 1 action to move him there. They are then going to spend 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 5 to get control of that. So at the moment they've still got 5 left. Now they've got quite a collection of these, so they're going to spend 3 to draw one of them. Unfortunately they didn't get another set, but that's still quite good. And with 2 actions left, they just want to try and control another area if possible, but that might be difficult. So what they will do is, yeah, they're at a wee bit of a loss actually, to be honest. So their best bet is probably at this point just to spawn a few more guys in. So they're just going to spawn a guy here, and then another guy here. Okay, so that turn wasn't as good for them, but you know, they did what they could to get some points. So in terms of points, they're going to get 1 for this temple here. They're going to get 2 for this temple here. And unfortunately they're not scoring anything else. However, they do have quite a lot of these. So for having the set, they're going to get 3, which puts them up to 5. And then 6, 7. So they're actually going to get 7 points, which is actually pretty close to the first player. And that effectively is how scoring works in Tikal. Okay, so now that we've covered the mechanics and the objectives of the games, it's time to talk about my personal opinion of Tikal. So, first of all, it is really an abstract game. Out of the 3 games, I would say that this one has the strongest theme in terms of the mechanics tying quite well to what you're actually doing in the game. But at the same time, it is quite abstracted. So really, it's not a game that you're going to go to if you want a great deal of theme, because you're not really going to find that here. Now, one of the big advantages of the game is how easy it is to learn and teach. Once players have got an idea of the goals of the game and you've explained the individual actions, it shouldn't really take people long to get a grasp of what you're doing. And really, you are kind of limited by your options. So I wouldn't say this is definitely not a gateway game, or maybe even a next steps game, but it is definitely on the lighter side of Euro-style games. So it is pretty accessible, which is always a big plus. The second big advantage I find in Tikal is there's actually a good degree of player interaction in the game. Because of the area control, and the tile placement, and the collecting of the artifacts, you are interacting with other players pretty regularly. And even though it's not direct interaction, I think there is enough going on there to make you feel that you're playing a game with other people and that it's not really a solitaire experience. So yeah, that's another thing that the game's definitely got going for it. Another thing I really like about Tikal is the interesting decisions that you get from the actions. You've got your 10 points and it's up to you how you use them, because most of the actions you can take in any order and in any quantity, with a few exceptions. So really, there's a lot of scope there on your turn for what you can do. And obviously you're reacting to what the other players have done as well, as I've said before. So there's a fair bit of scope there, which means that it'll appeal to more hardcore gamers as well as more casual gamers. I think there's a common ground there where it's going to appeal to a lot of people. Okay, so let's talk about some of the weaknesses of Tikal. Now, the first one that I'm going to point out is the randomness. Because the game is so reliant on these tiles and how they're placed, you really can get unlucky with the draw of these. In fact, the last game I played, I was drawing nothing but blank tiles, and my opponents were drawing temples, and they were able to place them, near their camps. And as a result, I felt that I just really couldn't compete. I was really quite hamstrung by it, and it was just unlucky. I just had really bad draws, and there's not much you can do about that. Now, the advanced auction variant that I've never played with, I think can fix this, because then you're sort of spending victory points to make sure you get the better tiles. So that can kind of balance it out. I could see that working really well. But base game, that is something that you need to be aware of, that there is a fair degree of luck there with the drawing of the tiles. The other issue I have with Tikal is the potential for analysis paralysis. Now, given that you've got a lot of actions and a lot of things that you can do, I find that this can overwhelm some players, and as a result, turns can take that bit longer because they're really thinking hard about how best to use their actions. This is especially prevalent on a scoring round, where you've got your 10 actions and you're trying to maximize your points as much as possible. So it might be something you might want to consider if you're a part of a gamer group where there's the potential for analysis paralysis. Then you're probably going to find that that might be an issue with this game. Finally, just a wee note about player count. Tikal, being a game of area control, works best with more players. In a 2-player game, it becomes a bit of a zero-sum affair, where if you're not gaining points, your opponent's getting them, and vice versa. So it doesn't tend to work as well. 3 and 4 players, I find, works really well because you have that extra interaction, and also, unless you're playing with players that have a lot of analysis paralysis, the 4-player game usually has pretty quick turns, and it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's not too long. So I would recommend, if you're planning on bringing this to your group, make sure you've got 3 or 4 players, because I think you'll get the most out of it with that being the case. So in summary, is Tikal worth considering as a game today, given that it's over 20 years old now? I would say yeah. I think there's a lot to like in this game. As long as you're not too big in the theme, and you're quite into area control and tile placement, this is a solid wee game that is a lot of fun. And I really think it's overlooked now. It doesn't really seem to be, one that people are talking about. And given that you can pick it up in original form quite cheaply, or with the reprints, which again are quite affordable, there's no reason not to go and check it out. So from me, Tikal, out of the 3 games, definitely comes with a recommendation. I'm not really going to spoil where it sits with the other games. I'll talk about that as I do the other videos. But I can say this, it is definitely highly recommended, so it's one that you should definitely check out if you like that sort of game. Okay folks, so I hope you enjoyed exploring Tikal with me, and if you're interested in the other games in the series, then please check out my follow-up videos. Thanks for watching and have a fantastic day.